Hi everyone, and welcome back to my YouTube. We're going to do a really simple video today. This actually stems from another question that I got on Tumblr. I did answer it with some simple drawings, but I'm going to do a little video basically about how to clip and grade curved seams. So I have this is a concave curved seam. It's concave because it curves inward, okay? That's the easy way to remember. Concave goes in like a cave. This is a convex curve. Convex curves go outwards. I don't have a fancy little, way to remember this one. And this is concave. So then the opposite of going in is out. So it would be convex. That's the best I can do. So I'm going to set up here. So 5/8 seam allowance on each of these, and then show you how to clip them. So I have two different scissors. I have a big pair of sewing shears, and then I also have a little pair of snips. And I'm going to talk about a couple different ways that you can clip curved seams. You clip each of these differently for different reasons, and I'll explain that, and then I'll talk about a couple of different options depending on exactly what you're doing and what the final application is going to be, or what the fabric you're using is, and how that can affect how you may or may not want to clip your fabric. So all right, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to stitch my convex curved seam really quick. Now, when you're stitching a curve, it's really important that this point over here is staying on your stitching guideline that you're planning to use for the seam allowance. So I don't watch my needle. I don't watch anything that's going on down here. I watch where my fabric is right here. Because if my fabric is in the right place here, it will be in the right place here. Since these are samples, I'm not bothering with back stitches. All right, and now we're going to do the same thing with my concave curve. Oh, the fabric side is slightly slid. All right. Okay, so first let's talk a little bit about the sort of seam allowance here. When you're trying to do a curve, here I'll show you what happens. You see how this seam allowance starts triple inside? That's because what you need to do is basically figure out how to fit the volume of this seam allowance in the volume of this area. And obviously, since there's more here than there is here, you need to take out fabric. So convex curves, you clip V's into, and that's actually the way that I remember it with convex. Convex has a V in the word, so you're gonna cut little pie wedge V's out. So the biggest thing with cutting out pie wedges is you want to clip to, but not through your thread. So we're going to go as close as we can to our stitch line without actually clipping through it. Okay, so you get little V's, convex. Well, pie wedges, you take little bites out of the fabric to allow this fabric to fold down and fit into a smaller area. You see how, like with a curve, like when it curves in, it gets rid of the fabric, so it gets rid of the ripple. Okay. On a concave curve, we need to be able to take this area and spread it out into this area, and this area actually is bigger, okay? So that's why it pulls, it gets flat. So in this particular case, this is the easy one. This you just snip. And again, you're cutting to, but not through your little line. And you can do that, you just want to get very, very close to your stitch line. So, but not actually cut through. Now, depending on your fabric, there's a couple of different options that you can do here on either of these. If you have a very light, loose weave fabric, this might not be the best choice. If you have a very, very, very light fabric, your best choice might actually be to trim the seam down. This is another way you can do it. Trimming your seam down to like 1/4 of an inch will actually also give you suddenly more stretch and the ability for this to stretch out and curve better. So you can do it either way. You can do your clips. Or you can do this. Now, if you have a thick fabric, sometimes you'll do a thing called grading. Let me show you grading. We'll show you grading on this one. Grading can be done a couple different ways. You can do it with your scissors, where you kind of turn them to the side. It works better on thick fabric. I'm not sure it's going to show up really well right here, but turn them kind of flat, and then, yeah, it didn't work very well. It actually ends up cutting, on thick fabric, you'll see a gradient. The one layer will be longer than the other. You can also do it individually, where you go in and you trim one layer shorter. So one layer would be this length and one layer would be this length. And that actually helps when you're working with thick things, kind of think of it like stair stepping or grading, like, you know, like on a ramp, like the gradient of a ramp. It allows things to step down and get smoother. So, but you can also use the trimming the short method on this too, because you're getting rid of all of this. There's going to be a lot less bulk of trying to get this try to get this seam allowance down into this area. So let's finish pie wedging this one. You can do any of this clipping with either sewing shears or a small pair of snips. The most important part is that they are sharp and that they close all the way to the end, so that you can really get in and do your nice little up close pie wedge. It's a stitch line. Okay, so here are the two different versions on this one. The short clipped, or the short cut seam allowance, that is better for looser weaves. Basically, this leaves more structure in place than this does. If this was a really loose fabric, this might fray more. This is going to stay a little bit more structured, but it will also ease into this area better. You can still clip this, but you could do you notice how, okay, in this one, my points are fairly far apart. You could do a lot, it would look like a lot less clips because your points are fairly far apart. If you needed to do some clips in here, you could do them farther apart than here, or because you're trying to get this folded in to here, you're accounting for more fabric than you are here. It's kind of complicated, I guess. It really is just something that you have to trust and do, and you don't even always have to clip that much. Like, it really depends on the steepness of the curve, how often you clip and how close together they are. So, and then we have on this sample, so on this sample I've got my slashing clips and my trimmed down seam. So let me go press both of these and we will show you the outcome. All right, here we are at the ironing board. I have a ham here. If you don't know what a pressing ham is, it is a sewing tool. It is usually a stuffed with either wood or sawdust or sometimes, very rarely, sand. You can get it, you can make them with fiberfill or fabrics or whatnot. I have a whole video on making one and covering my entire sewing room in this awesome fabric. I literally am just too broke to buy enough to make myself a dress to match everything. So, but they're very useful for pressing curves because they have curves on them. They have different volumes of curves. And they're very useful when you are trying to nicely press out curves. So I'm going to talk about a couple different ways that I press my curves, and it kind of depends on the application. You can press open curves and press everything to one side, or you can press open curves and press things flat like I started to do here. So we'll start with the flat first. When I am pressing a curve and I want it to be flat, I will usually start with a little bit of finger pressing, maybe a little bit of water on it, kind of start rubbing it and getting it open flat. And then I will come in with my iron and work my way up the curve. And it is kind of a slow process. This is one of the places where having a ham is actually rather useful because, let's see, you can kind of stick this on the curve. It's also very awkward to try to do and film at the same time. So we're going to try and get this whole curve open nice and flat. You see how I'm finger pressing it open here? I'm going to go in here. Open that curve seam nice and flat. I don't have distilled water for my iron right now, so I'm not putting anything in it until I can pick some up. Okay, so that gave us a nice flat seam. And that's great if you have a flat open seam. So then after I've pressed it on the inside, I usually will go, kind of depends on the fabric, and press it from the outside. Carefully so not to shine anything. This is cotton, so it won't shine, but say this was polyester or something that, you know, you don't want it shining. So that gives you a nice, look at how nice and flat that is. And you can already see, because I trimmed this so skinny, so thin, I'm not getting ripples. I have one little ripple right there. Otherwise, it nicely eased into this whole thing. And that is barely negligible as a ripple, okay? So on this side over here, I'm going to show you how to press it to the side. My personal preference of how to press a seam allowance to the side is I start from the inside, or the outside. I'll hold it open like this. Sorry, again, we're trying to work with camera angles. And so I'll hold it open like this, and I'll actually go into the seam first with my... So what that's doing is that's forcing this seam open flat, and it's also pushing everything to the side. It's not perfect, as you can see. This one kind of like rippled funny, whatnot. But then usually I'll go back in or flip it. We'll go back and we'll give it another press. Like the most important part of pressing is getting your seam allowance actually as wide open. I don't know why I did that because I don't have steam right now. Like I said, you really want to focus on a nice flat open seam. Right, so on this side now, I've got all of the seam allowance pressed to one side. My seam is nice and open and flat. You don't have, you don't have like this where you could like have a line here and you could open and see. You really want to focus on getting that flat open seam. Again, this is where you could come to a sewing ham and use that to help you like work your curve. All right. Now, let's say that you wanted to say this was something where you were bagging everything out. I would still get it to this point where my seam is nice and open and flat. And then I would do a press like this. To make the nice hard edge if it was something that you needed to have an edge, like if it was, I don't know, a pocket flap or maybe facing on a garment, like the edge of a garment, like a lapel or something, I don't know, pocket flap, lapel, bottom of a garment. So that is the convex curve, the one that goes out, all pressed and done. So let's show you the concave curve. We're going to approach this basically the exact same way. In this case, I open up the fabric. In this case, I'm going to press this one to the side and I'm going to press this side open flat just so you can see the difference of what that looks like. Okay, so again, if I were pressing the mini seam open flat, I would start from this side, get my seam allowance really wide open. That already looks like nice and flat. Then I come from this side, press it nice into the side. Okay, and you get a very nice open flat curve, right? Now, if you were doing these individually clipped, get my string out of the way. Again, this is where it gets a little trickier, especially if you've had to clip it. But finger pressing does a lot. See, that's already open. So this is kind of where I usually start. Again, just be careful so you don't get your fingers on your hot iron, or burn anything. Usually when I'm doing this, I also pull a little bit on the fabric to try and help ease that that seam open, so it's less likely to have weirdness on the underside. Okay, so you see that's nice and flat and open. Then we're going to check the other side and see. So I actually did a really good job. I don't have any like fabric that didn't press out nice and flat. Again, we're going to give it a press from the right side too to really set that seam in. And sometimes, so with this, sometimes you have to manipulate. Do you see how if I'm pressing this and this piece folds up like that, I'm going to press a seam into it. So, or a crease into it. That's not good. You don't want a crease here. So when you're doing this, you kind of need to like manipulate your fabric with the concave seam sometimes. So you might press this side and then you might come back and press this side and manipulate the fabric the other way so that you don't get a crease where you don't want it. Okay, so now I have a convex curve. And so now I'm going to press this flat just so you can see it pressed flat. And again, if I was pressing this flat to make this an edge of something, I would press it the same way I just did for the most part. And then I would wiggle it. And that way you make sure that you don't have like little fabric divots, I guess. I don't know what you want to call them. This way it's really nice, like your seam stitching is like right there and you have your nice concave curve. Okay, see, nice and smooth both sides, whether I did the short trim or the clipping. Now, like I said, this is something that I do, like if I was making a chiffon garment, I was making something out of chiffon or organza, something very lightweight, I would, and widgy or silk even, I would probably do this right here instead of the clipping. I would trim it very short. That way it would have more structure left in it and be less likely to fray out. Whereas this, I feel like you're more likely to get little frays. This would slowly like go away. Plus, it also leaves a lot of seam allowance. Oh, and that whole grading thing you can also do on this side as well. So if this was a very thick fabric, like a very thick wool or something, and I was doing the clipping, I could also go back in and I could cut down one of these sides to grade it so that it would like lay smoother, so I wouldn't get that like bump. It would give you sort of like a stair step and the fabric lay smoother. That's done a lot in suiting and whatnot when you're working with heavier like suit weight wools and stuff. I hope that this was a good explanation of the convex and concave curve and how to clip and press them, and that you found some useful tips here. Thank you so much for watching my video today. I really hope that you learned a few things. As always, hit the like and subscribe button if you want to see more of my content and if you want to help support me. I also have links in my bio or my description box for my Ko-fi account as well as my other social media if you want to see more of my wackiness. And I just really appreciate you all and love you. Hope you have a good week. Bye.